Hey friends, I'm Leah Scholl, pastor of First Friends Meeting in beautiful Greensboro, North Carolina, and I'm grateful that you've taken a little time to be with me today. Today we're talking about ambiguity and living in it, as we all so often do. So be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Now, y'all know that I don't always love Paul, right? I find his worldview to be very different than mine, and his understanding of the gospel is framed for me so absolutist and unambiguous that it makes me crazy. But sometimes his words speak to me, and usually it's when he's talking about what's happened to him. In today's text, Paul comes up with a beautiful solution when life didn't go the way he planned it. Paul decides to write a letter to the Romans when he was unable to visit them in person. He says, I planned many times to visit you, but I was prevented until now. Paul is admitting that even as a person of faith who is aligned in the Spirit, even as a person seeking to follow God's will, life doesn't always go the way we plan it. Can I get an amen on that? And when life doesn't go as planned, we are faced with ambiguity and uncertainty. Ambiguity is about holding two ideas at the same time and understanding something in more than just one way. It's about dualities, multiplicities, and active interpretation. It's, I planned to visit you and I was prevented. Ambiguity is different than uncertainty. Uncertainty is more like, will I get this job or not? While ambiguity is, this job will have upsides and downsides, and do I want this job or not? Ambiguity is vague. It is multiple ideas that are sometimes in conflict. It is possibilities and it is rough on the brain. And sometimes we're ambiguous about really big things like marriage. Maybe it's that you know your spouse is a lovely person whom you love, but you're living together, your life together is disappointing. Should you leave or should you go? Or maybe it's family relationships. You have a family member who is harming himself or harming others through his choices, and you don't know whether to hug him or tough love him. Or maybe it's your work life. Maybe it's needing a job versus loving a job. Yes, our brains really don't like it. We much prefer certainty over ambiguity. When we are uncertain or things are ambiguous, we feel uneasy, lost, or anxious. I've been playing with a little book called Navigating Ambiguity, Creating Opportunity in a World of Unknowns, that was written out of the Stanford School of Design. The book explains that there are strategies to employ when dealing with ambiguity. One of them is to balance your perspective. The book calls it look in or look out. Looking in means to find out who you are and do it on purpose. According to Guru Dolly Parton, that's the way she says it. Your unique values and perspectives can help you face ambiguity. Ask yourself, what is my mission in life? Look for overlaps in the needs of the world, your skills and abilities, and the things that you love. Then ask why to help you figure out where you really want to go and ask how to find out ways to get there. And how do you know when it's time to look in? Look inward when something is making you feel bad, when the world is telling you something that you don't agree with, when you're afraid, when you are faced with conflicting opinions. Actually, no time is ever a bad time to look in. Looking out means to seek input from the community. Cultivate curiosity about how others are also facing similar ambiguity. Ask others what they would do, not necessarily to follow their advice, but instead to see if there are other solutions, sort of third ways. And when do you know to look out? When you think you're alone, when you need to check your biases, when you're out of inspiration, when you've lost connection, and well, when you are sick of looking in. So find out who you are and do it on purpose. And then connect with others who are also finding out who they are and doing it on purpose. As most of y'all know, in my former life, I worked with returning citizens, ex felons, sex workers, and drug users. In this work, I lived and breathed a certain philosophy, one that for me is deeply rooted in my understanding of humanity, of myself, and of spirit. This is kind of how I found out who I am and what I try to do on purpose. And that philosophy is called harm reduction. If you do an internet search for harm reduction, about the only hits that you'll find are about using harm reduction as a tool to work with drug users. But I see it as so much more than that. For me, harm reduction is a philosophy that starts with three statements. First, that human beings are complex, created in the image of the divine, and yet we dehumanize them by reducing them to behaviors and pathologies. Two, we're surrounded by systems that are at best insufficient to meet the needs of all people. And at worst, unwilling to recognize the image of the divine in all people. Those systems stigmatize our most vulnerable neighbors, limiting access to opportunities and rights, including education, housing, healthcare, employment, and so much more. And three, our job as people of faith, as people who believe in the sacredness of humanity, is to transform our own lives, to create beloved community, and to liberate our systems through dignity, compassion, and love. And the tool of harm reduction is the best I've ever seen to do that. Harm reduction, in the words of the National Harm Reduction Coalition, is holy, faithful resistance, rooted in love and unapologetically insistent on justice. It is the expression of radical welcome, the welcoming of all stories and paths. Harm reduction calls people by name and attends to and cherishes their particularities. It is a hospitality that seeks people out, meets them where they are, and invites them into loving community. Harm reduction is love that stands with awe at the hardships that people carry, rather than stands in judgment at how they carry it. That all sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Pulled down another way, harm reduction is a philosophy that helps us when life doesn't go as planned. These are the strategies that harm reduction requires. Building a judgment free relationship. That means respecting the decisions people make about their own lives, even if their decisions are harmful to themselves or others. Agency, that's the word that encompasses the feeling of control over actions and their consequences, is key. Agency over our own lives should be a human right. It also means that people live with the consequences of their choices, but we don't leave people when they mess up. We walk alongside them no matter what those consequences are. So we have that context of a judgment free relationship. And in that, we build trust. And out of that trust, we may be able to educate folks on their choices and offer perspectives when they seek input on their decisions. That brings me to another principle, offering a buffet of choices. Oftentimes, folks in hardship feel like life isn't offering them any choices, but there are always choices. And choosing is a muscle that has to be exercised. In other words, choosing begets more choices. The next principle is telling the truth in kindness as an act of kindness. We so often skirt the truth with people because we're afraid it will harm our relationships or hurt people's feelings. When we kindly tell the truth, like showing folks the impact of their decisions, we open the door for honest discussions. And telling the truth also means that we often have to acknowledge our complicity in the harms done to folks. whether it's structural harms or harms we ourselves have committed. And as a result, we work to rectify not only our actions, but the harms that our systems of capitalism, racism, anti LGBTQIA nonsense, and violence, the harms that all those things commit day after day. And then finally, we keep showing up day in and day out, even when we don't want to, or it's hard, or it doesn't seem like it's working. So, harm reduction, and recap, it means to build a judgment free relationship, to take the time so that trust is built, to offer folks a buffet of choices, to tell the truth in kindness as an act of kindness, to acknowledge our complicity in the harms done to folks, and as a result, working to rectify not only our actions, but the harms that our systems create. And finally, we keep showing up day in and day out. We do this, y'all, because life doesn't always go as planned, right? All right, I love you and I love being your pastor. Bye.